In global commerce, nations engage in a delicate dance of buying and selling, imports and exports. A trade deficit arises when a country, like the United States, imports more than it exports. This economic imbalance has been debated among policymakers and economists for decades. A trade deficit can indicate a strong domestic economy, as confident consumers and businesses spend more, increasing demand for imports. It can also provide consumers with access to a wider variety of goods at competitive prices. However, persistent trade deficits can lead to job losses in domestic industries facing competition from cheaper imports. A large trade deficit can result in a country becoming increasingly indebted to foreign nations, making it vulnerable to economic shocks. The relationship between trade deficits and economic health is complex and multifaceted. Understanding this relationship is crucial for evaluating the potential impact of policies aimed at addressing trade imbalances. Tariffs, taxes on imported goods, have been used by governments to influence trade flows and protect domestic industries. Proponents argue that tariffs can level the playing field, protect jobs, and promote domestic production. By making imports more expensive, tariffs can boost domestic industries and generate government revenue. However, tariffs can lead to trade wars, with countries retaliating by imposing tariffs on exports. This can harm businesses and consumers on both sides, leading to higher prices and reduced purchasing power. Tariffs can also distort market forces, reduce competition, and harm innovation. The decision to impose tariffs involves weighing potential benefits and drawbacks. The effectiveness of tariffs in addressing trade imbalances and promoting economic growth remains debated among economists. In 2018, President Donald Trump, a critic of global trade agreements, announced tariffs on goods from various countries, notably China. These tariffs marked a departure from decades of U.S. trade policy favoring free trade agreements. The administration believed other countries were taking advantage of the U.S., leading to job losses and a growing trade deficit. Trump argued that tariffs were necessary to protect American workers and businesses and to negotiate better trade deals. The initial tariffs targeted steel and aluminum, materials vital to national security. The administration claimed that relying on foreign sources for these materials posed a risk to national security. The tariffs, set at 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum, received mixed reactions from businesses and economists. The tariffs on steel and aluminum imports sent shockwaves through the global economy. The European Union, Canada, and Mexico quickly announced retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. Businesses relying on imported steel and aluminum faced higher input costs, squeezing profit margins or leading to higher consumer prices. The tariffs created uncertainty, making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. The steel and aluminum tariffs highlighted the complex interconnections in the global economy and the potential for unintended consequences. The trade war between the U.S. and China erupted over accusations of unfair trade practices. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting key agricultural products and manufactured goods. The trade war escalated rapidly, with each side imposing new rounds of tariffs. In the U.S., businesses and consumers faced higher costs for imported goods, while exporters struggled to find markets. In China, the tariffs slowed economic growth and pressured businesses. The trade war had significant impacts on both economies. The U.S.-China trade war sent ripples through the global economy. Other countries faced difficult choices navigating the escalating tensions. The tariffs disrupted global supply chains, creating uncertainty for businesses. The trade war raised concerns about the potential breakdown of the rules-based trading system. The World Trade Organization found itself caught in the middle of the dispute. The trade war marked a significant shift in the global trade landscape with lasting implications. A central argument for Trump's tariffs was protecting American jobs and industries. Proponents argued that globalization and free trade led to outsourcing and job losses in the U.S. manufacturing sector. Tariffs would level the playing field, making imports more expensive and encouraging domestic production. This would boost demand for American labor, increasing employment and wages. Supporters cited the steel and aluminum industries as examples of sectors needing protection. They believed the short-term costs of tariffs were outweighed by the long-term benefits of a stronger domestic manufacturing base. The protection of American jobs resonated with many Americans. Another key argument for Trump's tariffs was rebalancing the U.S. trade deficit. Proponents argued that the trade deficit was unsustainable and detrimental to the American economy. They believed tariffs would reduce the trade deficit by making imports more expensive and encouraging consumers to buy American-made products. This would lead to increased domestic production and job creation. Supporters pointed to the large trade deficit with China as a particular concern. They argued that tariffs were necessary to pressure China to adopt fairer trade practices. The goal was to benefit both the U.S. and the global trading system. Proponents of tariffs argued that countries like China engaged in unfair trade practices. These practices included intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, and government subsidies. Tariffs were seen as a tool to pressure these countries to adopt fairer trade policies. By imposing costs on unfair practices, tariffs would force countries to reconsider their behavior. Supporters believed tariffs were necessary to protect American economic interests. Advocates argued that tariffs would lead to increased domestic investment and higher wages. Tariffs would create an incentive for companies to invest in domestic production and hire more American workers. This would drive up wages and boost consumer spending and economic growth. Supporters believed tariffs would reverse the trend of globalization and outsourcing. They argued that a protectionist trade policy was necessary for a stronger American economy. A significant portion of the pro-tariff argument centered on the perceived threat posed by China's economic rise. Proponents argued that China's policies were detrimental to the U.S. economy and threatened American economic dominance. They believed tariffs were necessary to counter China's unfair trade practices. By imposing costs on Chinese imports, tariffs would force China to reconsider its policies. Supporters framed the trade dispute as an existential struggle between competing economic systems. They believed tariffs were necessary to defend American economic interests and global leadership. One of the most immediate consequences of Trump's tariffs was higher prices for consumers and businesses. As tariffs raised the cost of imports, businesses passed these costs to consumers. This was noticeable for goods reliant on imported components like automobiles and electronics. Consumers faced higher prices, eroding purchasing power and potentially reducing spending. The tariffs created uncertainty for businesses, leading to delays in investment and hiring decisions. The rising cost of living fueled by tariffs could exacerbate existing inequalities and strain household budgets. Section 2. Retaliation and Trade Wars. A predictable consequence of Trump's tariffs was retaliation from trading partners. Countries like China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union responded to U.S. tariffs by imposing tariffs of their own on a range of American goods, targeting politically sensitive sectors like agriculture and manufacturing. This tit-for-tat exchange of tariffs escalated tensions and created a climate of uncertainty in the global trading system. The tariffs and counter-tariffs disrupted global trade flows, as businesses scrambled to adjust to the new realities of the global marketplace. Exports of American goods targeted by retaliatory tariffs declined, hurting American businesses and workers who relied on these markets. The trade war created a lose-lose situation, harming businesses and consumers on both sides of the dispute. Furthermore, the trade war undermined the rules-based trading system that had underpinned global trade for decades. By acting unilaterally and imposing tariffs without going through established dispute resolution mechanisms, the Trump administration weakened the World Trade Organization, WTO, and set a dangerous precedent for other countries to follow. Trump's tariffs had far-reaching consequences, disrupting global supply chains. Businesses faced higher costs, delays, and uncertainty. The shift toward regional production aimed to reduce trade barriers. However, this led to higher costs and less efficiency. The disruption also stifled innovation and economic growth. While the Trump administration argued that the tariffs were intended to protect American jobs and businesses, they also inflicted harm on certain sectors of the American economy. American farmers, for example, were particularly vulnerable to retaliatory tariffs, as China and other countries targeted agricultural exports like soybeans, pork, and corn. The loss of these key export markets led to a decline in farm income, forcing some farmers out of business and putting a strain on rural communities. Moreover, businesses that relied on imported inputs faced higher costs, which squeezed their profit margins and made it more difficult to compete. The tariffs also created uncertainty for businesses, making it challenging to plan for the future and potentially leading to delays in investment and hiring decisions. While some domestic producers may have benefited from the tariffs in the short term, the overall impact on the American economy was negative, as the costs of the tariffs outweighed the benefits. The tariffs led to job losses in certain sectors, higher prices for consumers, and slower economic growth. Critics of Trump's tariffs argued that they would ultimately stifle innovation and competition. By protecting domestic industries from foreign competition, tariffs could reduce the incentive for companies to innovate and become more efficient. Without the pressure of competition, companies may be more likely to rest on their laurels, leading to higher prices and lower quality goods and services for consumers. Moreover, tariffs could discourage foreign investment in the United States, as companies became wary of the unpredictable trade environment. This could deprive the American economy of much-needed capital and expertise, further hindering innovation and economic growth. A dynamic and competitive economy requires a level playing field where companies are incentivized to innovate and improve their products and services. The trade policies enacted by the Trump administration, characterized by tariffs on goods from countries like China, sparked intense debate and divided economists, policymakers, and the American public. Proponents argued they protected American jobs and reduced the trade deficit. Critics contended they harmed consumers and businesses, disrupted supply chains, and stifled innovation. The debate reflected deep divisions within American society. The impact of Trump's trade policies continues to be a subject of ongoing analysis and debate. The tariffs did lead to some job creation in certain sectors, such as steel and aluminum, as domestic producers ramped up production in response to reduced competition from imports. However, these gains were offset by job losses in other sectors, as retaliatory tariffs and higher input costs hurt businesses that relied on exports or imported components. The tariffs also contributed to higher prices for consumers, as businesses passed on the increased costs of imported goods. This, in turn, eroded consumer purchasing power and potentially dampened economic growth. While the tariffs did lead to a reduction in the trade deficit with China, this was partly offset by an increase in the trade deficit with other countries, as businesses shifted their sourcing patterns in response to the tariffs. The long-term impact of Trump's trade policies on the global trading system remains to be seen. The tariffs strained relationships with key trading partners, undermined the rules-based trading system, and created uncertainty for businesses operating in the global marketplace. The trade policies enacted by the Trump administration have left a lasting legacy on the global trade landscape, prompting a reassessment of traditional trade relationships and prompting countries to explore new approaches to trade. The Biden administration, while pledging to take a less confrontational approach to trade than its predecessor, has maintained many of the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, citing the need to protect American jobs and counter unfair trade practices. The future of global trade will likely be shaped by a complex interplay of factors, including the ongoing rivalry between the United States and China, the rise of regional trade agreements, and the growing importance of digital trade. Countries will need to navigate these challenges carefully, balancing the need for open markets and fair trade with the imperative of protecting domestic industries and jobs. The debate over trade policy is likely to continue, as countries grapple with the challenges and opportunities of an increasingly interconnected global economy. The choices made by policymakers in the years to come will have profound implications for businesses, workers, and consumers around the world.